The diary in the cigar box. People talk about revenge like it has to be explosive screaming fights, public humiliation, vicious social media takedowns that go viral overnight. They picture dramatic confrontations, slamming doors, cutting every tie with a loud, satisfying bang. But that's not how real justice works, not for the kids written off as burdens, the grandkids loved only by one aging elder, the ones forced to bite their tongues for decades to keep a broken family from falling apart completely. This is the quiet revenge story. No screaming, no staged viral moments, no cruel plots to ruin lives out of blind rage. It is the true story of Colleen Hale, a girl her birth parents dismissed as Grandpa Arthur's charity case from the age of 7, a girl who spent 18 years watching the man who loved her with every breath sacrifice his health, his savings, his own comfort to give her a stable life while her blood parents chased luxury trips and empty happiness thousands of miles away. When Grandpa lost his battle with lung cancer, Colleen thought the worst betrayal she would ever endure was watching her mother and father post glowing beach vacation photos instead of attending his funeral. Then a mysterious text from her dead grandfather's old cell phone led her to a cedar cigar box hidden in the back storage closet of his weathered clapper house. Inside lay a free blue leather diary and a mountain of bank slips, tax records, handwritten ledgers filled with numbers that exposed nearly 2 decades of theft, manipulation, and cold-hearted abandonment. What follows is every quiet wound, every sleepless night, every small sacrifice Grandpa buried in his writing, every hard truth Colleen was forced to face, and the calm, unshakable justice she brought forward in a sterile Midwestern courtroom. This story does not glorify rage. It teaches 3 unshakable truths anyone trapped in toxic family bonds needs to hear. Love is measured by who shows up, not by empty sweet words spoken only when money is on the table. Drawing firm boundaries with people who repeatedly hurt you is not cruelty. It is the greatest honor you can give the people who spend their lives protecting you. And plain, unaltered truth, written down and preserved carefully, will always outlast the most confident, polished lies. Chapter 1: Beach Selfies Instead of a Funeral. The funeral parlor's central air conditioning hummed a cold, monotonous drone that seeped straight into Colleen Hale's bones. It was mid-July in their small Midwestern town of Millfield, where summer days usually sweltered with thick, sticky humidity, but the funeral home's frigid interior felt like a tomb, matching the heavy grief weighing down every inch of her body. Polished dark oak floors reflected rows of cheap white daisy wreaths, all Colleen could afford to buy with her minimum wage grocery store part-time paycheck, and the massive oak casket holding Grandpa Arthur Hale sat centered on a raised velvet platform, draped with a faded navy blanket he crocheted himself 20 years prior. Colleen stood rigid at the foot of the casket, her fingers white-knuckled around the cool wooden edge, staring down at Grandpa's still face beneath the glass viewing panel. 6 months of brutal chemotherapy had wasted away his broad, sturdy lumberyard frame. The man who once lifted full stacks of pine planks over his shoulder without breaking a sweat had shrunk down to skin and bones, his once rosy cheeks sunken, his familiar bushy salt and pepper beard thin and patchy. The only thing that still looked like him was the faint crease beside his left eye, the mark left from decades of grinning when he'd sneak her hard candy after school, when he'd laugh at her terrible teenage poetry, when he'd hold her tight after every birthday, every holiday, every night she'd cried herself to sleep missing parents who never cared to call. Colleen's throat burned raw, swollen from 3 straight days of non-stop crying. She'd skipped all her summer community college classes the second Grandpa's doctor broke the news that his late-stage lung cancer had spread to his liver, packed a duffel bag, and moved straight into his tiny guest bedroom to care for him full-time. For half a year, her entire world had shrunk down to 4 walls of his creaky old house. She'd woken at 4 each morning to brew weak herbal tea for his inflamed throat, blended soft broth from boiled chicken and root vegetables he could swallow without pain, rubbed menthol ointment into his aching, arthritic joints for hours each night, and read dog-eared vintage Western novels a lot until his labored breathing slowed enough for him to drift into fitful sleep. She missed her midterm exams, turned down every shift at the supermarket that didn't fall during short windows where a neighbor could stop by to sit with him, and drained every dollar of her meager savings to cover prescription copays and expensive oxygen tank refills his minimal senior pension couldn't stretch to cover. For 18 years, Arthur Hale had been her entire world. Colin's earliest clear memory of her birth parents, Lisa and Mark Hale, dated back to the rainy Saturday afternoon they'd abandoned her on Grandpa's front porch when she was 7 years old. The sky had turned gunmetal gray by noon, torrential rain slapping against the siding of his clapboard house, thunder cracking loud enough to make the young girl flinch and bury her face in the scratchy fabric of her oversized second-hand raincoat. Lisa and Mark had pulled up in their shiny black SUV, a brand-new vehicle Grandpa could never have dreamed of affording, dragged Colin's beat-up plastic suitcase out of the back seat, and dropped it hard onto the rotting wooden porch step without a single glance back at their daughter. Colin still remembered every word they muttered to Grandpa through the cracked screen door, sharp and unkind, as rain soaked their designer windbreakers. "We can't keep taking care of her anymore. This kid's nothing but a charity case for you to deal with. We're starting over, building a new life, and we don't have room for a kid who drags us down." Charity case. Those two words had stuck to Colin's skin like mud ever since. She'd heard them whispered behind her back at elementary school parent-teacher conferences, mumbled over awkward annual phone calls her parents only bothered to make when they wanted something from Grandpa, tossed casually into text messages demanding cash for their vacations, their new furniture, their fancy restaurant dinners. Lisa and Mark had never once considered her their daughter, only an inconvenient burden they pawned off on her elderly grandfather without a second thought. After dumping her on the porch that stormy day, they peeled out of Grandpa's gravel driveway, tires spraying muddy rainwater all over his floor beds, and vanished for years at a time. No birthday cards arrived for Colin's 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th birthdays. No Christmas gifts, no holiday phone calls, no check-ins when she broke her arm falling off a bike at 12, no concern when Grandpa's health first began to decline when she turned 16. They remarried quickly after leaving her, each finding new spouses with disposable income, buying bigger houses, booking expensive overseas trips, posting endless polished photos of their perfect, stress-free life on every social media platform. Colin had clung to a fragile, childish hope for over a decade that they might one day change. She forced herself to stay polite during their rare, rushed phone calls, swallowed down every bitter retort when they made snide comments about her hand-me-down clothes and Grandpa's rundown house, bit back tears when they hang up mid-conversation the second she mentioned needing money for school supplies or Grandpa's medical bills. She spent years telling herself blood meant something, that family should love you no matter what, even if they never showed up. Grandpa had never pushed her to let go of that hope, only quietly told her, "You can wish for their love all you want, but don't let it eat you alive waiting for something that's never gonna come." She brushed his words off back then, too young and lonely to accept the harsh truth he saw clearly from the start. Now, standing beside his casket, on the eve of his funeral, Colin's phone buzzed violently in the pocket of her plain black cotton dress, pulling her out of her haze of grief. She fumbled it out with trembling fingers, expecting a text from the kind elderly neighbor who'd brought over a plate of chocolate chip cookies after Grandpa passed, or a message from her supermarket manager offering condolences. Instead, the screen lit up with an Instagram notification from her mother Lisa's public profile, a post tagged directly so Colin could not avoid seeing it. The photograph seared itself into Colin's vision instantly. Bright, blinding tropical sunlight, crystal turquoise Caribbean Ocean stretching endlessly behind them, soft white sand under their bare feet. Lisa and Mark stood side by side grinning wildly into the camera, matching bright turquoise cocktail glasses balanced in their hands, designer sunglasses perched on their foreheads, expensive gold jewelry glinting on their wrists and necks. The caption blazed across the bottom of the screen in loud bubblegum pink font, "Living our best life. No stress, just paradise, 椰子树." Colleen's chest constricted so tight she could barely draw a breath. A ragged, bitter sob tore out of her throat, echoing through the quiet funeral parlor. The funeral service was scheduled for 9 o'clock the following morning, and her birth parents had not sent a single condolence text, had not wired a single dollar to help cover the steep funeral home fees Colleen could barely afford, had not even acknowledged Arthur's death in any way. Instead, they'd flown thousands of miles to a luxury beach resort, sipped overpriced fruity cocktails, and posted cheerful vacation photos for all their followers to admire, completely ignoring the man who'd raised their abandoned daughter single-handedly for 18 years, the man who'd worked himself to the bone to keep their child fed, clothed, educated, and safe while they chased mindless leisure across the ocean. In that moment, Colleen truly believed this betrayal was the worst pain she would ever carry. She thought nothing could cut deeper than watching the two people who gave her life celebrate paradise while the man who loved her unconditionally lay cold and silent in a polished oak casket. She thought the endless loneliness, the years of dismissal, the cruel label of charity case they stuck on her were the peak of their cruelty. She had no idea how wrong she was. By sunset, the last handful of Grandpa's former lumberyard co-workers and elderly church friends had filed out of the funeral parlor, offering quiet hugs and mumbled words of comfort before climbing into their cars and driving away. Colleen signed all the final paperwork with the funeral director, paid the remaining balance of the service in one lump sum that drained nearly every cent of her savings, and dragged her exhausted, grief-heavy body back to Grandpa's empty house on the edge of Millfield. The second she twisted the front door open, every corner of the small home crashed over her with waves of overwhelming absence. The floorboards creaked under her scuffed canvas sneakers, every room steeped in the faint, familiar smell of Grandpa's cherry cigar smoke, a scent she always teased him about as a teenager and now ached to inhale one more time. His frayed red flannel work shirt still dripped over the arm of his worn leather armchair by the living room window. The ceramic chipped coffee mug he drank black coffee from every morning sat untouched on the kitchen counter beside a half-empty bag of his favorite peppermint hard candies. The stack of dog-eared Western paperbacks he'd reread 100 times lined the edge of his nightstand. Colleen collapsed onto the threadbare crocheted blanket he'd made for her when she was 10, the fabric soft from 18 years of constant use, and curled into a tight ball on the sofa. Silent, hot tears soaked through the wool yarn as she replayed the Instagram beach photo over and over in her mind, replaying every cruel comment her parents had ever tossed her way, every holiday they'd skipped, every hospital visit for Grandpa's declining health they'd ignored entirely. She'd spent so long clinging to the faint hope they might grow to care about her, and they'd proven beyond any doubt that she meant nothing to them next to their fancy vacations and perfect curated social media image. She lost track of how long she sat there crying, her phone tossed face down on the cushion beside her, until the screen suddenly flared bright again, cutting through the dim twilight filtering through the kitchen windows. A text message popped up at the top of her lock screen, and Colleen's blood turned to ice the second she registered the sender's phone number. It was Grandpa Arthur's old beat-up flip cell phone, the device he'd tucked into the front pocket of his canvas overalls every single day for as long as she could remember. The hospital staff had collected all his personal belongings after he passed away 3 days prior, and Colleen had locked the phone away in a kitchen drawer, fully intending to charge it and sort through his contacts once the funeral chaos settled. No one else had access to the device's number. She double-checked every lock on the house's doors and windows before she left for the funeral parlor that morning, sliding deadbolts shut and latching every window screen tight. There was no logical explanation for a text coming from his dead phone. The message itself was short, plain, no signature, no extra emojis, no friendly tone. Come to the back storage closet. There's something I left for you. Don't let anyone else see it. Colin's hands shook so violently she could barely grip her phone to read the words a second time. A cold prickle of dread ran down her spine, mixed with a strange, desperate longing that this could somehow be Grandpa reaching her from beyond grief. She pushed herself unsteadily to her feet, stumbling toward the junk drawer beside the refrigerator to grab a dusty plastic flashlight with a weak yellow beam, and padded barefoot down the narrow, dim hallway toward the cramped storage closet at the very back of the house. The wooden closet door creaked loudly when she twisted the rusty metal knob, and a thin cloud of dust swirled through the narrow beam of her flashlight as she stepped inside. Stacked metal shelves lined every wall, crammed full of forgotten holiday decorations, rusted garden rakes and shovels, stacks of faded old tax paperwork, and cardboard boxes full of Grandpa's vintage lumber tools he'd collected over 40 years of work. Her flashlight beam swept across every shelf, lingering on clutter she'd seen hundreds of times before, until the thin yellow light landed on a small polished cedar cigar box tucked high up on the top wooden shelf, hidden behind a stack of old paint cans. Grandpa had always brushed off questions about that box whenever Colleen asked what was inside, waving a hand and saying it held nothing important, just random old odds and ends he'd collected over the years. Curious as a teenager, she tried to climb a chair to peek inside once, and he gently but firmly pulled her down, saying it was private, something he'd set aside just for her for far down the line. At 17, she'd let the curiosity fade, assuming it held old photographs or meaningless trinkets from his youth. Colleen dragged a wobbly folding step stool from the corner of the closet, climbed carefully to the top step, and stretched her arm out as far as it would go to grab the cedar box. It was lighter than she expected, smooth polished wood worn soft at the edges from years of being handled, a tiny brass latch holding the lid shut tight. She climbed back down the stool, set the box gently on the cold concrete floor of the closet, and clicked the brass latch open with a quiet snap. Two items stared up at her from the soft velvet lining inside the box. The first was a faded blue leather diary, Arthur's Lupin, messy cursive embossed into the front cover in worn gold lettering, the pages thick and crinkled at the edges from decades of use. The second was a massive, thick stack of paper bound together with frayed rubber bands, bank deposit slips, official IRS tax forms, handwritten line ledger pages covered in neat columns of numbers, printed wire transfer receipts, and typed email screenshots printed out and annotated with Grandpa's tiny handwriting in blue ink. It was a mountain of financial records so detailed even a professional accountant would have spent hours untangling every line of data. Colleen sank to her knees on the dust-covered concrete floor, her heart hammering so hard against her ribcage she could hear it pounding in her ears, and reached out to lift the blue leather diary first. She brushed a thin layer of dust off the cover with her trembling thumb, flipped open the front page, and began to read the first entry dated October 12, the exact day 7-year-old Colleen had been abandoned on his front porch, in the pouring rain. Chapter 2: The pages that unspooled a lifetime of hidden sacrifice. The ink of Grandpa's earliest diary entries had faded slightly over the 11 years since he first picked up the notebook, but his handwriting remained clear and unmissable, every word raw, unfiltered, and stripped of any pretense. He'd never been a man who shared his pain out loud. He'd swallowed every hardship, every slight, every financial worry alone, only pouring his unspoken thoughts onto the pages of the blue diary when the house fell silent at night and Colleen was asleep in her bedroom down the hall. Reading his words felt like stepping inside a secret world he carried entirely alone for 18 years, a world Colleen had never once glimpsed through all the quiet smiles and gentle reassurances he'd given her growing up. The opening entry, dated October 12, the day of abandonment, stretched across 3 full pages of lined paper, the pen strokes heavier and shakier than later entries, proof of how upset he'd been that rainy afternoon. 星号 October 12, Colleen turns 7 next month. My daughter Lisa and her husband Mark showed up on the front porch at 2 o'clock sharp today, driving that shiny black SUV they splurged on last spring. They dragged Colin's plastic suitcase out of the back seat and tossed it on my steps like trash, didn't even kneel down to hug her goodbye. I heard them mutter charity case under their breath before they climbed back in the car, loud enough for both of us to hear. The little girl cried into my flannel shirt for 3 straight hours after they left, her small body shaking so hard I could barely hold her steady. She kept asking what she'd done wrong, why her mom and dad didn't want her anymore, and I had no good answer to give her. I told her she isn't charity, never has been. She's my granddaughter, my whole heart, the best thing that ever happened to me. I told her I'd never leave her, no matter what it costs me. I'll pick up double overtime shifts at the lumber yard every weekend, skip my own blood pressure doctor's visits to save gas money, sell my collection of vintage hand planes I've spent 30 years collecting if I have to. I will work myself raw before I let this little girl go without food, new clothes, or a roof over her head. Blood doesn't make family. Showing up does, and I'm showing up for her every single day for the rest of my life. 星号. Colin's eyes blurred instantly with fresh tears as she traced the looping letters with her fingertip. She'd been so young that day, too hurt and confused to fully grasp the weight of Grandpa's promise, too busy grieving the parents who'd thrown her away to notice how much he'd sacrificed to keep her safe. Page after page unfurled 18 years of quiet, invisible hardship she'd never fully understood as a child and teenager. Grandpa documented every double overtime shift he picked up to cover her elementary school field trip fees. Every winter he'd skipped buying himself a new warm coat so he could afford snow boots and insulated jackets for her. Every late night he'd stayed up sewing patches onto her hand-me-down jeans when they tore at the knees. Every penny he'd stashed away in a locked savings account labeled Colin's College Fund, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his bedroom closet. He wrote down every small medical emergency she'd faced through the years, every doctor's copay he'd scraped together out of his meager weekly paycheck, every bottle of children's cold medicine he'd bought when she'd caught the flu in winter, every expensive orthodontist bill for braces she'd worn for 3 years in middle school. He never once complained about the cost, never wrote a single bitter line about the endless stack of bills piling up on his kitchen counter. His only regret, repeated dozens of times across hundreds of pages, was that he could not afford to give her nicer things, brand new backpacks, trendy clothes, or fancy birthday parties like the other kids in her class. He spent decades feeling guilty that he could only provide the bare minimum, never realizing Colin had never cared about material possessions. All she'd ever wanted was consistent love, something her birth parents had never given her once. Interspersed between entries about Colin's school days, her soccer games, her teenage poetry hobby, and their quiet weekend trips to the lake outside Millfield were dozens of passages detailing Lisa and Mark's repeated manipulation and financial exploitation. Grandpa recorded every passive-aggressive phone call they'd made demanding cash, every ungrateful text message they'd sent complaining he wasn't sending them enough money, every time they tried to pressure him into dipping into Colin's locked college savings fund for their own frivolous spending sprees. One entry dated spring of Colin's 16th year made Colin's jaw clench with boiling, long-suppressed rage. 星号 Lisa called me yesterday afternoon while I was unloading lumber at the yard, talking loud and sharp like she had every right to demand something from me. She and Mark are planning a 2-week luxury Caribbean beach vacation next summer, flying first class, renting a private oceanfront villa, and they need extra cash to cover the deposits and activity fees. They had the absolute gall to ask me to drain the entire college savings account I've built for Colin over the last 9 years, claiming the money is theirs by legal right because Colin is their biological daughter. They called me selfish and miserly when I told them flat out no, accused me of hoarding funds that belong to their blood family, said I was holding Colin back from having a better relationship with them by refusing to hand over thousands of dollars for their vacation. They don't spare a single thought for the teenager who needs that money for textbooks, tuition, housing when she graduates high school. All they see when they think of Colleen is a wallet they can exploit to fund their endless leisure trips. I hung up the phone halfway through their rant, turned back to my lumber stack, and worked an extra 4-hour overtime shift that night to add another $100 to the college fund. I won't let them steal her future before she even gets the chance to build it. 星号. Beneath the blue leather diary rested the thick stack of financial records bound with frayed rubber bands, and the neatly printed numbers spread across every slip of paper told an even more damning, irrefutable story of 18 years of theft. Colleen spread the stack out across the closet's concrete floor by the beam of her flashlight, sorting the documents into organized piles as Grandpa had pre-labeled them with blue ink handwriting on sticky notes. The first pile held 18 consecutive years of IRS tax return transcripts, printed out annually and filed away carefully. Every single tax filing revealed that Lisa and Mark had illegally claimed Colleen as a dependent child on their federal taxes, collecting thousands of dollars in child tax credits and dependent care benefits every April despite the fact that they had not housed, fed, clothed, or provided a single cent of care for Colleen since she was 7 years old. The IRS rules clearly stated that only the primary legal guardian providing more than half of a child's yearly financial support could claim dependent benefits, and Grandpa's attached bank receipts, grocery store purchase logs, and medical payment slips proved beyond any doubt that he had covered 100% of Colleen's living expenses for nearly 2 decades. Lisa and Mark had knowingly committed tax fraud every single year, pocketing government money meant to cover Colleen's basic needs while they spent the stolen funds on luxury trips, designer clothing, new cars, and restaurant dinners. The second pile consisted of handwritten ledger pages, Grandpa's meticulous tracking of every wire transfer and cash payment he reluctantly sent Lisa and Mark over the years, dating back to Colleen's 8th birthday. Every entry noted the exact dollar amount sent, the date of transfer, and the exact reason they'd given for demanding the cash: new furniture deposits, holiday travel costs, home renovation supplies, concert tickets, spa resort getaways. Grandpa had only sent the money to avoid explosive screaming phone calls, hoping small handouts might soften their cold attitude toward Colleen, but every ledger entry ended with a short, bitter note confirming they'd never followed through on their empty promises to visit or call their daughter after receiving the cash. The third stack held printed screenshots of every hostile email and text message Lisa and Mark had sent Grandpa over the years, each one annotated with Grandpa's handwritten notes detailing the context of their demands, the lies they'd told to pressure him into sending money, and their repeated dismissal of Colleen's well-being in favor of their own comfort and pleasure. Colleen sorted through every document slowly, her hands shaking as she processed the full scale of the betrayal hidden inside the cedar box. Grandpa had known they'd been stealing money intended for her future for nearly 20 years, and he'd quietly collected every single shred of tangible evidence without a word to Colleen, storing it safely away in the cigar box in case the day ever came when she needed proof to stand up for herself against her birth parents. He carried the weight of their exploitation alone for nearly 2 decades, protecting her from the ugly truth to spare her more heartbreak while she was still young and vulnerable, waiting until he no longer could shield her from their cruelty to leave all the evidence at her disposal. She flipped back to the very last entry in the blue leather diary, dated 3 days before Grandpa passed away in the hospital, his handwriting shaky, slanted, and faint from the brutal chemo treatments that had stolen his strength, the ink smudged in several spots where his trembling fingers had slipped mid-sentence. 星号, if you're reading these words, Buck, I'm gone. Don't waste another minute of your life clinging to the childish hope that Lisa and Mark will ever love you the way you deserve to be loved. They labeled you a charity case your whole life, but they're the real burden. They've spent 18 years living off the money and benefits meant to support you, taking every dollar they can squeeze out of us without giving a single ounce of care in return. Every tax transcript, every bank slip, every email printout in this cedar box is irrefutable proof of what they've done to us both. The law doesn't reward people who abandon their children and steal government benefits reserved for their care. Take this entire box to a trusted family law attorney as soon as you can. Walk into that courtroom and tell the judge the whole unvarnished truth. Hold up every piece of evidence to back up your words. You don't owe them peace. You don't owe them forgiveness. You don't owe them polite silence to keep the family from fighting. You owe yourself justice for every lonely birthday, every skipped hospital visit, every time they chose their own luxury and leisure over you. Stand tall, don't cry for them, and fight for the future I spent 18 years saving up for you. I'll be right there beside you, every step of the way, 星号. Colleen closed the blue leather diary gently, pressing her forehead against the worn soft leather cover as silent, heavy tears streamed down her cheeks and soaked into the fabric. She wasn't only grieving Grandpa's loss anymore, she grieved every lonely, hopeful version of herself that had waited years for her birth parents' affection. Every quiet night Grandpa had sat up late documenting their manipulation alone so she wouldn't have to carry that pain too young. For 18 years, she forced herself to keep the peace, to swallow down her hurt and disappointment to avoid conflict with blood relatives who'd never cared about her well-being. Grandpa's carefully preserved words and paperwork stripped that useless, self-sacrificing politeness away completely. She picked up her phone from the closet floor, unlocked the screen, and stared once more at the glowing beach vacation post Lisa had uploaded to Instagram, the bright turquoise ocean and matching tropical cocktails mocking her grief. Their perfect, stress-free paradise had been funded entirely by stolen tax money meant for Colleen's food, medical care, and college tuition money Grandpa had worked 60-hour weeks to earn, money he'd sacrificed his own health to save for her future. Colleen set the phone down beside the cedar box, wiped her wet cheeks with the back of her hand, and closed the brass latch of the cigar box tight, clutching it securely against her chest. She was done biting her tongue to keep the peace. She was ready to follow Grandpa's final instructions, to lay every hidden truth out in the open, and claim the quiet justice he'd spent his last months preparing for her to receive. Chapter 3 Sleepless Nights Preparing for the Fight. Colleen barely slept a single hour that night after returning to the living room with the cedar cigar box tucked safely under her arm. She dragged Grandpa's wooden kitchen table into the center of the living room, spread every document from the box out across the tabletop under the warm glow of the overhead ceiling lamp, and sorted the tax records, bank slips, diary pages, and email printouts into neatly labeled manila folders she found in Grandpa's home office desk drawer. She worked through midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., cross-referencing every handwritten ledger entry with matching bank deposit receipts and tax transcripts, double-checking every date and dollar amount to ensure no piece of evidence was misplaced or unorganized. As she sorted the papers, she paused repeatedly to flip through the blue leather diary again, rereading Grandpa's raw, honest entries to steady her resolve whenever panic and grief threatened to overwhelm her. She spent so long fearing confrontation with her birth parents, terrified of their angry retaliation, terrified of being labeled ungrateful, bitter, and cruel for holding them accountable for their 18 years of abandonment and theft. Grandpa's writing erased that fear bit by bit with every page she read, reminding her that protecting herself from toxic family was not cruelty, it was honoring every sacrifice he'd made to give her a chance at a stable, secure future. By 3 o'clock in the morning, Colleen had fully organized every piece of evidence into 5 color-coded manila folders, one labeled abandonment you neglect, one labeled tax fraud documentation, one labeled unlawful financial demands, one labeled Grandpa's diary personal testimony, and one labeled email you text message evidence. She stacked the folders neatly back inside the cedar cigar box, set the box on the nightstand beside Grandpa's empty bed, and collapsed onto his crochet blanket-covered sofa for a few fitful hours of restless sleep, her mind racing non-stop with plans to find a local attorney first thing at dawn. When the first faint gray sunlight peeked through the kitchen window at 6 a.m., Colleen showered quickly, put on a crisp plain navy blouse and dark slacks, and grabbed the cedar box from the nightstand, tucking it securely into a sturdy canvas tote bag Grandpa had owned for decades. She skipped the funeral viewing hours scheduled for 8 a.m., leaving a short note for the funeral director explaining she had an urgent legal matter to attend to, and drove her beat-up second-hand sedan across town to the downtown Millfield legal district, searching for a family law attorney with experience handling dependent tax fraud and civil restitution cases involving abandoned minor children. After calling free law offices and leaving brief messages explaining her situation, she booked an emergency same-day consultation with Eleanor Voss, a mid-50s attorney with a reputation for representing vulnerable young people exploited by toxic family members, who ran a small independent law firm 2 blocks from the county courthouse. The receptionist showed Colleen into a quiet, sunlit conference room lined with wooden bookshelves full of legal textbooks, and Colleen set the cedar cigar box down on the polished oak conference table, waiting nervously for Ms. Voss to join her. 10 minutes later, Attorney Eleanor Voss stepped into the room, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, her expression calm and compassionate as she pulled out a chair across from Colleen and gestured for her to explain the full story, from the beginning. Colleen spoke slowly, steadily, without breaking down into tears, walking the attorney through every detail of her abandonment at 7 years old, 18 years of Grandpa's sole guardianship, Lisa and Mark's repeated refusal to provide care or financial support, their cruel charity case label, the Instagram beach vacation post posted on the eve of Grandpa's funeral, and the mysterious text message from Grandpa's dead phone that led her to the hidden cigar box full of evidence. When she finished recounting the full story, Colleen lifted the cedar box's lid and spread the 5 color-coded manila folders across the conference table, sliding the blue leather diary forward first for Ms. Voss to read. The attorney picked up the diary and flipped through dozens of pages, her expression growing more serious and focused with every entry she scanned, then moved on to sorting through the stacks of tax transcripts, bank ledgers, and printed digital communications. She spent nearly 40 minutes reviewing every document in silence, scribbling quick notes on a yellow legal pad beside her elbow as she cross-referenced the numbers on Grandpa's handwritten ledgers with the official IRS filings. When she finally closed the last folder and set her pen down on the table, Attorney Voss's eyes widened slightly with quiet shock, and she tapped a stack of tax transcripts with one finger to emphasize her point. Colleen, this evidence is ironclad, unbreakable in court, she told her firmly, her tone steady and reassuring. Your birth parents have committed 18 consecutive years of felony tax fraud by illegally claiming you as a dependent child they never provided any care for, knowingly collecting thousands of dollars in government child support credits they had zero legal right to receive. Beyond the criminal IRS violations, we have more than enough proof to file a civil restitution lawsuit demanding full repayment of every dollar they stole, plus additional court-ordered financial penalties for their repeated exploitation of your grandfather and yourself. Every diary entry, bank slip, email screenshot, and tax filing your grandfather preserved lines up perfectly to build an airtight case against them. There is no reasonable excuse their defense attorney can present to discredit this documentation. Colleen swallowed hard, twisting the frayed strap of her canvas tote bag between her fingers. I don't want to keep any of the recovered money for personal spending, Ms. Voss. Every single dollar they're ordered to repay needs to go straight into a locked, untouchable college trust fund in my name, exactly like Grandpa planned all those years. I don't want their cash as revenge. I just want them to face the legal consequences of stealing the funds meant for my education and basic care for nearly 2 decades. Attorney Voss nodded in full understanding, scribbling Colleen's request prominently at the top of her legal pad. That stipulation is easy to include in our formal lawsuit filing. We will specify in every court document that all recovered restitution funds must be deposited into a restricted, educational trust fund with no early withdrawal permissions, per your grandfather's documented wishes written in the diary. I can draft and submit the full civil complaint to the county clerk's office before the end of today, and we will submit all tax fraud evidence to the local IRS Criminal Investigation Unit simultaneously to launch a separate federal inquiry into their fraudulent filings. By midday, the formal lawsuit paperwork was fully drafted, signed, and filed with the Millfield County Courthouse, and copies of all 18 years of tax fraud evidence were mailed to the IRS Regional Investigation Office via certified, priority mail. Court summons papers were printed and scheduled to be hand-delivered to Lisa and Mark's suburban home on the outskirts of town the exact afternoon they returned home from their 2-week Caribbean beach vacation, their suntan vacation glow still fresh from the resort photos they posted across social media. For an entire month after the lawsuit filing, Colleen did not receive a single phone call, text, or social media message from her birth parents. She threw herself back into the funeral arrangements and Grandpa's estate cleanup to fill the empty hours, sorting through his belongings, donating excess furniture to the local youth shelter, tending his small backyard vegetable garden every morning, and continuing her part-time supermarket shifts to cover living expenses. She kept the cedar cigar box on her bedroom nightstand at all times, rereading short passages of the Blue Diary each night before bed to maintain her resolve for the upcoming court hearing. Exactly 31 days after the lawsuit was filed, Colleen's cell phone rang one evening as she was washing dishes in Grandpa's kitchen, and the caller ID displayed her mother Lisa's phone number. Colleen hesitated for 3 full rings before hitting the accept call button, bracing herself for the inevitable angry tirade she knew was coming. Lisa's shrill, furious voice blasted through the phone speaker the second the line connected, sharp and unhinged with rage. How dare you drag your own blood family into a public court lawsuit over trivial pocket change? Arthur was an old man with more than enough savings stashed away. You're acting ungrateful, cruel, and vindictive, throwing messy family drama out for random strangers at the courthouse to gossip about just to punish us for taking a simple vacation. Colleen's voice remained calm, steady, no trace of the childish longing for Lisa's affection that had lingered in her heart for 18 years. She did not raise her voice, did not snap back with angry retorts, simply stated the plain facts without hesitation. You left me abandoned with a dying 70-year-old man when I was 7 years old. You skipped his funeral entirely to launch on a tropical beach posting vacation photos online for your followers. You illegally stole thousands of dollars in government tax benefits meant for my food, medical care, and education for 18 straight years. Do not lecture me about family loyalty when you have never acted like family to me once in my entire life. Mark's cold, dismissive voice cut into the call from the background, loud enough for Colleen to hear clearly. We called you a charity case for a reason when we dropped you off with Arthur. You were a burden we never asked to bring into this world. We shouldn't be forced to pay back money Arthur chose to waste supporting you all these years. Colleen did not waste another second arguing with them. She said a quiet, firm this conversation is over and pressed the red end call button on her phone, setting the device face down on the kitchen counter before returning to washing Grandpa's ceramic coffee mug. The words stung, but Grandpa's diary entries echoed in her mind, reminding her their cruel opinions no longer held power over her life. A formal court date was mailed to Colleen's address 2 weeks later, scheduling the civil restitution hearing for 2 months in the future, exactly 8 weeks away. Every night after finishing work and household chores, Colleen sat at the kitchen table with the cedar cigar box open beside her, reorganizing every piece of evidence, highlighting key passages in the blue leather diary to read aloud on the witness stand, practicing her planned testimony until every word felt steady and unshakable. She refused to let anxiety or fear of facing her parents in court weaken her resolve. Grandpa's quiet sacrifice and final written instructions were enough to push her forward through every moment of self-doubt. Chapter 4: The Courtroom, where all lies fell apart. The county courthouse courtroom was a sterile, quiet space lined with pale oak wooden benches, neutral gray carpet, and soft diffused overhead fluorescent lighting that cast no warm shadows, matching the cold tension hanging thick in the air the morning of Colin's civil restitution hearing. Colin arrived 45 minutes early with attorney Eleanor Voss, carrying the cedar cigar box clutched tight in her hands, the worn blue leather diary peeking out over the edge of the tote bag slung over her shoulder. She dressed in a modest, neutral gray blazer and black slacks, her hair pulled back neatly in a simple low ponytail, no makeup covering the faint dark circles under her eyes from weeks of sleepless preparation. Lisa and Mark arrived exactly 10 minutes before the judge took the bench, walking into the courtroom side by side with their hired defense attorney trailing a step behind them. They wore crisp, expensive designer business clothes, their skin still carrying a faint golden tan left over from their Caribbean beach vacation, their expressions haughty, entitled, and unrepentant as they slid onto the wooden benches on the opposite side of the courtroom aisle from Colin. They did not glance in her direction once as they settled in, their heads tilted together to whisper quietly to their lawyer, their body language radiating unspoken arrogance and confidence that their polished excuses would easily dismiss all of Colin's evidence. The judge, a calm, fair-minded middle-aged woman with decades of family and tax fraud case experience, called the courtroom to order, and attorney Voss stepped forward first to deliver the opening statement, laying out the full timeline of abandonment, 18 years of sole guardianship by Arthur Hale, the consistent illegal dependent tax filings, and the comprehensive written evidence preserved in the cedar cigar box. She outlined Colin's simple, unchanging request, full financial restitution of every stolen tax credit plus court-ordered penalties, all funds locked into a restricted college trust fund in Colin's name, and a formal referral of all tax fraud documentation to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division for separate federal prosecution. After the opening statements concluded, the judge called Colin to the witness stand, and she walked slowly across the courtroom floor, the cedar box resting securely on the evidence table beside the judge's bench, ready to be presented as official court exhibits. She sat upright in the witness chair, placed one hand flat on the Bible to swear an oath of full, honest testimony, and turned to face the judge, her voice clear and unwavering as she began to recount every painful chapter of her 18 years with no hesitation or nervous stammering. She described the rainy Saturday afternoon she'd been abandoned on Grandpa's front porch at 7 years old, repeating the exact charity case comment Lisa and Mark had muttered before driving away and leaving her behind. She detailed every empty birthday, every unacknowledged holiday, every hospital visit for Grandpa's declining health they'd ignored entirely, and recounted the crushing grief of standing beside Grandpa's casket on the funeral eve only to see their glowing Caribbean vacation photos pop up on her social media feed. When she finished walking the judge through the personal history of neglect and abandonment, Attorney Voss stepped forward and handed the cedar cigar box to the court clerk, who carried it up to the judge's bench for official review as Exhibit A. The judge spent nearly 20 minutes flipping through the blue leather diary, reading Grandpa's handwritten entries silently, then sorted through the stacks of tax transcripts, bank ledgers, email printouts, and wire transfer receipts one by one, marking each document with an official court exhibit sticker as she processed the overwhelming volume of proof. Once the judge finished reviewing the cigar box evidence, Lisa and Mark's defense attorney stood to deliver their rebuttal argument, attempting to dismiss every piece of documented proof with polished, rehearsed excuses designed to paint Colin as a bitter, vengeful young woman twisting minor misunderstandings into a fabricated legal case. The attorney claimed the 18 years of consecutive dependent tax filings were innocent administrative errors, made by their unqualified tax preparer every spring, argued Grandpa had voluntarily sent them cash out of his own free generosity with no coercion, and insisted Colin's entire lawsuit stemmed from teenage resentment and a desire for dramatic family revenge rather than legitimate financial harm. The defense attorney's practiced lies flowed smoothly for 10 minutes, until the judge cut his argument short, picked up the blue leather diary, and read one of Grandpa's handwritten entries aloud for the entire courtroom to hear, the passage detailing Lisa and Mark's demand to drain Colin's college savings fund to pay for their luxury Caribbean vacation. The entry where Grandpa explicitly noted they viewed their own daughter as nothing more than a disposable wallet to exploit for leisure spending. A heavy, suffocating hush fell over the courtroom the second the judge's voice finished reading the diary passage. Lisa's cheeks flushed bright scarlet with embarrassment and shame, her head dropping forward to stare at the polished leather toes of her expensive designer shoes, unable to lift her gaze to meet anyone's eyes. Mark's confident, arrogant posture crumpled instantly, his shoulders hunched inward, his jaw tightened, and he stared rigidly at the gray carpet beneath his feet, no longer able to maintain the unrepentant mask he'd worn since walking into the courtroom. Every polished, carefully rehearsed lie their defense attorney had presented shattered completely, exposed by the quiet, unalterable truth Grandpa had written down years before they imagined anyone would hold them legally accountable for their actions. After a short 15-minute recess to review all submitted exhibits and deliberate on the case facts, the judge returned to the bench and delivered her official ruling within an hour of the hearing's start. Her judgment was clear, decisive, and fully in Colin's favor. The court ordered Lisa and Mark to repay every single dollar of illegally claimed child tax credits spanning 18 consecutive years, plus substantial civil financial penalties for their repeated fraudulent filings and intentional exploitation of Arthur Hale and Colin. The judge signed a formal legal mandate requiring all recovered restitution funds to be deposited directly into a locked, restricted educational trust fund solely for Colin's university tuition, housing, and academic supplies, no early withdrawals permitted for any reason, exactly matching the stipulation Colin and attorney Voss had requested at the initial consultation. The judge also officially authorized the full transfer of all tax fraud evidence to the IRS Criminal Investigation Department, triggering a separate federal criminal inquiry into Lisa and Mark's 18 years of felony tax violations, which carried the risk of steep additional fines and potential probation sentencing upon completion of the IRS audit. Before officially adjourning the courtroom session, the judge turned her gaze directly to Colin, her voice soft but firm, carrying a quiet weight of wisdom that echoed Grandpa's written lessons from the Blue Diary. Blood relation does not equal love, young lady. Love is measured by who consistently shows up for you through hardship, who sacrifices their own comfort to protect your future, not by pretty vacation photographs or empty sweet words only spoken when money is on the table. Your grandfather showed up for you without pause, without complaint, for 18 full years, and this verdict honors every ounce of quiet devotion he gave you. Drawing clear boundaries with people who repeatedly abandon and harm you is not cruelty. It is the greatest respect you can give the person who spent their entire life shielding you from their neglect. Colin walked out of the courthouse clutching the cedar cigar box pressed tight against her chest, warm silent tears streaming down her cheeks, but these were not tears of grief or loneliness. They were tears of relief, closure, and quiet victory. The justice Grandpa had spent his final months preparing her to claim finally realized in a sterile Midwestern courtroom. No loud screaming fights, no viral public humiliation, no cruel plots to ruin Lisa and Mark's lives, only plain, unwritten truth preserved on paper, calmly presented to a neutral judge, resulting in fair, balanced consequences for nearly 2 decades of exploitation and abandonment. This was the quiet revenge Grandpa had intended for her all along, not rage, but unshakable truth. Chapter 5: Quiet closure, not loud revenge. Several months passed after the courtroom judgment, and Colin's birth parents ceased all contact with her entirely. No more angry phone calls screaming accusations of ungratefulness, no more passive-aggressive social media posts indirectly targeting her, no more last-minute attempts to beg her to drop the IRS fraud investigation or waive the court-ordered restitution payments. The weight of their 18 years of betrayal lifted off Colin's shoulders entirely. A heavy invisible burden she carried since 7 years old finally set down for good, never to return. Colleen moved back into Grandpa's clapboard house permanently, tending his small backyard tomato and cucumber vegetable garden every early morning before her supermarket shift, polishing the cedar cigar box and setting it on a prominent wooden shelf beside her bedroom bed, where the blue leather diary rested open to Grandpa's final entry every night. She enrolled full-time at Millfield Community College that fall, every textbook, tuition fee, and campus housing cost fully covered by the restricted college trust fund the court had secured from Lisa and Mark's restitution payments, exactly as Grandpa had spent 18 years hoping she would one day afford to do. In her spare time between classes and grocery store shifts, Colleen volunteered twice a week at the local youth shelter for abandoned and neglected teenagers, sharing her personal story of abandonment, exploitation, and quiet legal justice with other young people trapped in toxic, neglectful family dynamics. She brought photocopied excerpts from Grandpa's blue diary to share with shelter teens struggling to accept their own family pain, teaching them the 3 core lessons Grandpa had written down for her inside the cedar box. Love is measured by who shows up, not by empty words spoken only when money is on the table. Setting firm boundaries with people who repeatedly hurt you is not cruelty, it's how you honor the people who spend their lives protecting you. The unaltered truth, written down and preserved plainly, will always outlast every confident polished lie. One mild autumn evening, Colleen sat alone on Grandpa's weathered wooden front porch swing as the sun dipped low below the tree line, painting soft orange and pink streaks across the midwestern sky. She pulled the blue leather diary down from the porch side table and traced Grandpa's faded looping handwriting with her fingertip, rereading the entry he'd written the day she was abandoned on the porch, the promise he'd made to love and protect her no matter what cost he had to pay. She did not crave loud, dramatic revenge against Lisa and Mark. She had no desire to post humiliating screenshots of their fraudulent tax records to social media. No interest in staging public confrontations to shame them in front of their friends, no urge to pursue further legal action beyond the court-ordered restitution and IRS investigation Grandpa's evidence had triggered. Grandpa's quiet, paper-based justice had been more than enough closure for her, the truth laid bare in an official courtroom, the stolen college funds fully returned to her locked trust account. Permanent legal boundaries drawn between herself and the birth parents who never loved her. She thought back to the long summer months of grief, panic, and preparation after Grandpa's funeral, the night she found the cedar cigar box hidden in the back storage closet, the thousands of pages of handwritten sacrifice and unspoken pain she uncovered inside the blue diary. All the hardship, loneliness, and financial struggle she and Grandpa had endured together for 18 years was no longer just a story of loss and abandonment. It had become proof that quiet, consistent devotion could outlast every act of selfish cruelty, that preserving the truth could grant gentle, permanent healing without blind rage or bitter retaliation. Colleen closed the diary gently and set it back on the porch table, smiling softly as she glanced over at the flourishing tomato plants Grandpa had planted the summer before his cancer diagnosis, heavy with ripe red fruit hanging from their vines. She was no longer the lonely 7-year-old girl labeled Grandpa's charity case, no longer the teenager clinging to fragile hope for a parent's love that would never arrive. She was the granddaughter of a man who loved her fiercely, selflessly, and without hesitation for 18 years. The young woman who stood calmly in a courtroom and told the unvarnished truth to secure her own future, and the keeper of a quiet, unshakable truth that had finally set her free from a lifetime of family pain. The most powerful revenge stories in the world never make loud noise, never go viral on social media, never rely on screaming arguments or public humiliation. They are the quiet, unassuming true stories, the ones preserved in a tattered leather diary locked inside a cedar cigar box, the ones built on decades of hidden sacrifice, the ones resolved in a sterile courtroom with plain, unglamorous paperwork and calm, unemotional testimony. They are the stories of people who refused to keep the peace for the sake of cruel, ungrateful blood relatives, who chose to honor their lifelong protectors by standing up for themselves, who let the written truth speak louder than any angry shout ever could. As the last rays of sunset faded over Grandpa's flower beds, Colleen leaned back against the porch swing's weathered wooden slats and breathed in the warm autumn evening air, the faint lingering scent of Grandpa's cherry cigar smoke drifting softly from the open living room window behind her. Every cold lonely night, every stolen dollar, every cruel label, every skipped holiday, every quiet sacrifice her grandfather had endured alone had led to this moment, hard-earned peace, permanent closure, and a bright, unburdened future fully funded by the justice hidden inside a small cedar cigar box and a faded blue leather diary.